Hello, and welcome back to the Mental Oasis podcast. I'm your host, Christine Forte. A topic that's been on my mind recently is that of making social comparisons to the people around us, the people we know, or the people that we see on social media. And my thinking is that we could reflect on this some together. Now, with the parenthesis that I probably will bring to you more questions about this topic than specific answers, because it's so important, I find, that each individual reflect to find the answers that make sense to them. Giving this some context, during this time of quarantine, there's so many of us at home really using social media as a way to connect. And of course, it is fantastic that we have the means to do this, that we have the ability to connect to people through call, through video, through messages, in order to just have that bonding time, that time to keep up our relationships, but also to get feedback, to get input from others, inspiration. There are so many really wonderful uses of social media. But of course, one of the downsides can be the way that we might tend to start comparing ourselves to the lives of others. So, for example, we might see perhaps some of the things that a friend has been doing in quarantine, and somehow the idea starts to plant that it seems like what they're doing is much better than what we're doing. Or perhaps even we feel like that they are doing something and we're feeling like we aren't doing something today. So we start to compare, we ask ourselves things like, is that the way that I'm using my time during quarantine? Is it as worthwhile as theirs? Or, they seem to be coping so much better than me. Or, look at what they're doing today as compared to what I have going on. Oh, wow, they've made bread. They've done some really creative art project with their kids. Maybe they're starting a new creative thing of their own. And, all of these thoughts then start chasing around. Well, should I be doing that? Or is what I'm doing enough? Or is what I have enough? And of course, in a larger sense, this can always be happening, even outside of quarantine. We're comparing our accomplishments or achievements or our number of followers, number of likes to what someone else has. And this can be really frustrating to our energy. We can feel drained by making these kinds of comparisons. To give this kind of some background from a societal standpoint, we could argue that there is a purpose to all of these comparisons that we're making. We are, in a sense, as humans, programmed to compare to others. It helps us to understand if we're more or less fitting in with the larger group, if we're following the rules and the norms, if we're doing what needs to be done at a particular time. Comparison can be also an important part of social learning, which is the way that we learn certain behaviors by following the models of others. So learning to walk is one of these. When babies learn to walk, they're attempting to copy the people they see around them. Language and learning to speak are other important areas that are essentially copied from hearing others do it. So social comparison is a tremendous aspect of how we learn. But from an emotional perspective, as adults, there are times when it can begin to take an unhelpful turn, when it starts to become something that's creating distress for us and not helping us to learn, but instead generating feelings within us of being not good enough or that what we are doing isn't worthwhile. And this is where social comparison can cross over into something really less than useful. It can stand not only as a drain to our energy, but also as a block to being able to open up to others or to learn from them or to feel connected when social comparison that's coming up in a negative way in our relationships. It can create disconnections with those friends because instead of thinking about listening to each other or enjoying a moment together, we're thinking about comparing ourselves to the experience or accomplishment of our friend. And this is something that I know we've probably all experienced from time to time because, as I mentioned, it is an offshoot, sort of an underbelly of our human tendency to compare and learn from others. But where possible, we really want to work on fostering a different feeling of using social comparison for learning where we can, and then trying to have it stop there. We want to work towards building our sense of worth and value not coming from how we're doing in comparison to others, but instead just being things that reside deeply within us. However, of course, as with so many things that we work towards in ourselves, this is something that I would say is a continual process that we have to keep revisiting, keep working on. And as a first step, what we really need to do is just acknowledge, to try to understand what it looks like within us, to identify the feelings around social comparison, to identify where we're doing it or what it creates for us in our interactions, but also within us, to understand this a bit better. And this is how we can just begin to observe when we're starting to compare a lot to others, what's coming up, and working on then shaping that time into something that's more helpful to me, something that's fueling my growth, rather than creating a draining experience. So what I'd like to ask you to do, if you would like to join me in beginning to reflect on just acknowledging this and becoming more aware of the impacts that it may have had, is just to begin to turn your attention inward, just as we have before in our reflection times together. Just as I'm even saying those words, beginning to notice what it's like for you as you begin to direct your awareness towards your inner experience of comparing to others. And you can center yourself in this moment by taking a couple of deep, cleansing breaths. A couple of deep breaths to begin to slow down and prepare to seek a deeper level of understanding, deeper awareness within yourself, preparing for some reflection, for a moment of calm and of restoration. And as you're breathing deeply in, simply allowing the breath to expand the chest, the ribs, the lungs. As you focus inward and as perhaps you begin to slow down just a little bit in beginning to seek inner understanding, inner guidance. And as you're taking those deep, relaxing breaths, perhaps the next thing to do is to begin to turn your inner focus, your inner attention to noticing what it's like when you have an experience of comparing to someone. You might even perhaps begin to recall the most recent time that you found yourself doing this. May have even been earlier today or yesterday, just the most recent time where you found yourself measuring your own experience or accomplishments against that of someone else. And in drawing your awareness to this, trying to gaze softly upon it without judgment of yourself. For as I mentioned, this is part of our human tendency. It isn't somehow a shortcoming within you that you've done this, or that, that this is a part of thinking sometimes. That this is something that we're all in together. So gazing with gentleness on whatever you notice there. And perhaps observing how much of the time perhaps there's not even really a fully formed thought around the comparison. But how sometimes there may even just be half a thought, or almost just a feeling of suddenly not feeling as good as we did before. Suddenly feeling less than. and observing when that feeling arises. What else is going on? What is part of the internal narrative of what you might be telling yourself there? Observing this fully and being open with yourself about it again in a spirit of gentleness that we're just seeking to learn and understand and observe. And in observing this experience, what is that like? What are the sensations? What are the thoughts, the emotions that perhaps when you begin to see the success of someone else that you might on some level wish was your own? Noticing, what does that cross into for you? Are there elements of jealousy or elements of guilt about what you're doing or not doing, or some sort of form of blaming yourself or someone else? Observing deeply. If you start to question yourself or wonder if you're doing enough, and noticing that in all of these questions there is just a deep humanness. There can even be a sense of humility that we bring to them as we ask, am I enough? Am I doing enough? And sending compassion to ourselves for those questions. And perhaps, if possible, beginning to absorb the wisdom that all of our experiences, all of our abilities are so different. And we all serve different important roles in our lives, in the world and in society. And it's impossible to say that one is better than the other or more important than the other, but they're all different. And if we can, just noticing that suggestion, that piece of information now, seeing if it feels possible to start to access it or absorb it. And as you switch back and forth between noticing that piece of information and noticing the comparisons that arise, I would invite you to imagine calling those comparison thoughts out in front of you, lining them up with some sort of texture or substance. Perhaps they look like a row of rocks or of some sort of putty, or maybe there's something less tangible like clouds or simply collections of energy. Calling those thoughts and comparisons out in front of you now. And then, if it feels accessible to you, now just observing those things. Seeing that they are human reactions, but they are not your truth. They are not the truth. The accomplishments or behaviors or possessions or relationships of others do not determine anything about your worth. They don't indicate anything at all about your value. And that your value and goodness is inherent in you just because it is, not because it's more or less than anyone else's. So putting all of those thoughts and feelings out in front of you now, and then I'd encourage you in whatever way feels most natural to you to put distance between yourself and those thoughts, feelings, or questions. in whatever way that feels most natural. You might see yourself pushing them away, or allowing them to float off or dissolve or disappear somehow into the air. Or it may be that you simply turn and walk away from them, allowing yourself to simply put greater distance between those thoughts and feelings of doing better or less than others, or of questioning yourself as a result of the experience of others, and taking all the time you need to put that distance. And this may be something that, as I said before, needs to be a continual practice rather than something we do once, because it's a part of our human nature. And so just extending gentleness towards yourself on that, to put distance for now between yourself and those thoughts. Taking a few more deep cleansing breaths. Taking all the time that you need there, and even pausing if it feels most helpful to do so. And I'd like to thank you as always for joining me here in this mental oasis experience and reflection. I hope you found some inner guidance during this moment. I'm Christine Forte, and you can find more information at forteklotz.com. That's FORTEKLOTZ.com. And if you found this useful today, please do subscribe or leave a review. And I'm looking forward to sharing with you again next week.